So, here goes. First, the story, like all good stories, has a plot. And I can describe that plot quite simply. The plot is this. The early universe, after the Big Bang, 13.8 billion years ago, was very, very simple. Incredibly simple. And then, over 13.8 billion years, more and more complex things appeared, one by one. And complexity built on complexity, until eventually you have this staggeringly complex world we live in today. Just driving through Hong Kong is, for me, a staggering reminder of how complex modern human society is. So, here's the question. How do you get from that early universe, which is very simple, to today's universe? The early universe, 400,000 years after the Big Bang, let's say, consisted of a sort of thin mist of hydrogen and helium atoms. No oxygen, no nitrogen, no gold, no silver. There are no stars, there are no planets, there are no living organisms, there are no cockroaches, there are no iPhones, none of that stuff exists. Just this thin mist of hydrogen and helium atoms. Really very boring. And you know that it was all at the same temperature. You may have seen this image before. It's based on the cosmic background radiation. We can measure variations in the temperature of the universe 400,000 years after the Big Bang. And they were tiny, maybe 100,000th of a degree difference. So this is very smooth, very simple, not very interesting, actually, from our point of view. Then, over 13.8 billion years, more interesting things appeared, more complex things. Now, today, most of the universe remains extremely simple. If I could pick one of you up, let's see, who am I going to pick up? Anyway, so if I could pick one of you up in imagination and throw you randomly somewhere in the universe, the odds are that you would find yourself in a very simple place. It would be empty, it would be cold, you would die very, very quickly indeed. That's what most of the universe today is still like. But in special places, like our beautiful planet Earth, you get special Goldilocks conditions which are just right to allow the components of the universe to arrange themselves into more complex things. And we call this process emergence when it happens. Suddenly, things get rearranged into something more complex. And it's always very beautiful when it happens. There was once a universe without life. Then there was a universe with life. Where did life come from? It's a bit like watching the birth of a new baby. So this is what we describe, the slow, beautiful, creative process of creating new entities. And it leads to the extreme complexity of today's globalized world. So it's a story that's very much about us, because today's world represents an extraordinary level of complexity. So that's the question. How do you get from this simple early universe to Hong Kong today? How do you get there? Well, the story has a villain. Every good story should have a villain. Well, some people say it's a hero, but anyone, any idea who the villain is? Shout out just one word. Okay, entropy. The villain is entropy. Entropy is the tendency of everything in the universe to break down, to become more boring, to become less interesting. Entropy will eventually kill me. I'm a complex thing, entropy will break me down, and I fear entropy will do the same to you eventually. Entropy will break down everything interesting. Entropy is really mean. And entropy will break down all complexity. Eventually, the universe will get simpler and simpler and simpler again. So here's the puzzle. In a universe in which entropy is so powerful, how is it possible to create complex things? It's a very deep puzzle about the nature of our universe. And I'm not sure that modern science yet has a perfectly adequate answer. Let me just give you two possible answers to be going on with. The first is that immediately after the Big Bang, now I'm assuming you sort of know what the Big Bang is, at one moment, everything in the universe, every bit of energy, every bit of matter was squashed into something much smaller than an atom. And that thing was exploding and expanding, and it's still expanding today. Now, immediately after the Big Bang, some rules appeared. The rules said things like energy will take the form of gravity. Gravity will pull things together. It will also take the form of electromagnetism. So there were some rules from the very beginning. And that guaranteed the universe wouldn't be pure, just a mess. But there's a second answer to this question, which is subtler. When you build complex things, you always need flows of energy. So whenever you see something complex, you can ask, what's the flow of energy that drives it? If you see a bus, you can ask, what's the flow of energy that drives the bus? Now, when energy flows, that energy also gets broken down. It gets degraded, becomes more disordered. So entropy is sitting there thinking, great, I love this. Whenever you get complex things, the complex things degrade energy. So complex things are doing entropy's work. And that may be why entropy allows complex things like you and me and Hong Kong to appear in the universe. Okay, what's the story? Now, I'm going to look at some dates, okay? In my book, you'll find this timeline. Very simple timeline. It's got about 13 dates for 13.8 billion years. So let me explain the timeline. Over here, we have events. 8 of those events are what I call thresholds of increasing complexity. These are moments when something new and more complex appears, moments of emergence. Now, there are lots of moments. I could have had 10, I could have had 100, I could have had 1,000. 8 is about right to help people navigate through this story. So those are the thresholds, and the first is the Big Bang. The second is the creation of stars. The third is the creation of new elements. And the fourth is the creation of planetary bodies, like moons and asteroids and planets around stars. Now, to give you some feeling for how thresholds work, let me talk about the star formation. This is threshold 2. How does it work? Well, notice always the energy flows. Keep an eye on the energy flows. So here's how it works. Let's go back to that early universe. Very simple, hydrogen and helium atoms, no structure. Gravity is the crucial actor. So gravity, you'll remember, pulls things together. So what gravity does in the early universe is start clumping these clouds of hydrogen and helium. So the universe breaks into millions, trillions of clumps of hydrogen and helium. And then they get denser and denser and denser. And as they get denser, they get hotter. And atoms and protons begin to bang into each other more and more violently. While the rest of the universe is getting colder, these clouds are getting hotter. And eventually, the temperature at the center of some of these clouds is so hot that protons start to fuse together. Now, that may not seem very exciting at first until you know that this is what happens in a hydrogen bomb. Protons fuse together, some of their mass turns into energy, and there's a huge explosion of energy at the center of each cloud. So at the center of these clouds, suddenly you've got a burst of energy, and gravity squashing them, the burst of energy is pushing back, and the whole thing stabilizes. And now this thing lights up, energy is pouring out of it, and we have a star. So think of the early universe with stars lighting up all over the place, billions, trillions of them, all because of this same process. And the energy that allows this complexity is from fusion at the center of stars. And that's what's happening to our own sun. Now, a universe with stars is already a much more interesting place than the universe without stars. Stars are complex, but they gather together in complex communities called galaxies. The universe is now much more varied. There are hot spots, there are cold spots, there are dense spots, there are empty spots. And from stars, energy is pouring out into space. So there are huge flows of energy that can be used to make more complex things. Now, I hope that gives you some sense of what I mean by a threshold of increasing complexity. Now I'm going to move faster through this timeline. Threshold 3 is the creation of new elements. You couldn't make you or me with just hydrogen and helium. So where did the other elements come from? Well, to make oxygen or nitrogen or carbon or gold or uranium, you need to bang together protons to create their nuclei. To do that, you need a huge amount of energy. So the question is, where in the early universe do you find enough energy to bang together 92 protons to make a uranium nucleus? And the answer is inside dying stars. Above all, inside large dying stars. When large stars die, they run out of protons, the furnace at the center collapses, the whole thing collapses, generating temperatures so high and sometimes creating supernova explosions so that you can create all the other elements of the periodic table. So now, after threshold 3, the universe is much more interesting chemically. You can now make dust, you can make ice, you can make water, you can make gold, you can make silver, and using those materials, we can cross threshold 4 and create planets and asteroids and meteorites and moons and planet Earth, our own home. So I hope you see how complexity builds on complexity. Now let's go back to these dates. Here we have dates. None of those dates I could have told you 50 years ago. So these dates are new in modern science. Over here, I've divided the dates by 1 billion, and there's a reason for that. Our brains are not designed by evolution to understand 1 million years or 1 billion years. We can't do it. If a geologist says, yeah, I know what 300 million years is, don't believe them. They're lying, I guarantee, okay? So we need help. And that's what this column does. It divides all the dates by 1 billion. So let's imagine the universe began 13 years and 8 months ago. Actually, a student in a lecture I gave the other day said, it should be 13 years, 9 months ago. I think I've got the maths wrong. I was never very good at maths. Anyway, so 13 years, 9 months ago. The first stars appeared about 13 years, 2 months ago, and new elements have been forged continuously from then. And our sun and solar system were formed about 4 years and 6 months ago. Threshold 5 is the creation of life. Life probably exists in many other parts of the universe, but we only know about it at the moment on Earth. In the next 20, 30 years, we may discover life elsewhere. Very simple life, bacterial life, appeared on Earth about 3.8 billion years ago. That's 3 years, 9 months ago. Complex life appeared 600 million years ago, 7 months ago. That's life with billions of cells, large organisms like you and me. And that suggests that making complex life is very difficult. Now let's move fast forward. 65 million years ago, an asteroid lands in what is today the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico, creates a sort of nuclear winter, and it wipes out the dinosaurs. This is terrible news for the dinosaurs, but it's really good news for us. Because what it allowed was, with the dinosaurs out of the way, mammals flourished and evolved and changed very rapidly. And we humans are part of that process, that mammalian radiation. We appeared at threshold 6. This is 200,000 years ago. That's 100 minutes ago on this chart, okay? Can you see how recent we are? And that raises a question. Is our appearance really a new threshold? Are we that important in this story? I'm going to come back to that in a minute, and I'm going to argue that we really are. And then the threshold 7, agriculture, begins 10,000 years ago. Oh, note how recently, yes, we entered the story. And then we get cities, we get empires, and finally threshold 8, the fossil fuels revolution. 200 years ago, or on this chart over here, 6 seconds ago. That's when the Industrial Revolution happened. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6. And that's the time since the Industrial Revolution on this final scale. Okay? And then our big history courses talk about the future, and they go into the future. And I'm not going to talk about that here, but it's absolutely fascinating talking about the future. We'll talk about it just a little bit later on. Okay, now, part 3. I want to talk about the place of humans and today's world in a modern origin story. How do we fit into this story? Well, we really are very, very strange indeed. The biosphere has evolved for 4 billion years, and we are the strangest species yet to evolve. So let me explain what I mean. What changed was what I call collective learning. We're the first species in the history of planet Earth that can communicate information in such volume and in such precision. Just imagine if I tried to give the rest of this lecture in mime. You wouldn't understand a thing. Words are so powerful. We can exchange so much information that information accumulates from generation to generation. And we're the first species in 4 billion years to do that. Now, this is powerful, makes us very powerful, because information is power. It gives us control over energy flows, over resources, and eventually it has turned us into the most powerful species on Earth, and a species that is beginning to change this entire planet. So collective learning is the crucial thing, this capacity to exchange information, and it makes us different from every other organism before us. And let's track human history through this idea of collective learning. It begins 200,000 years ago in the Paleolithic. Here's the chimp range. Chimps are like other species. They fill a niche and they stay there. They don't change. But watch humans. Humans appear here, then they start entering other niches. Each migration is creative. It involves collective learning. You need to learn how to manage deserts, how to manage seashores, how to manage tropics. And then they move into Eurasia. These people crossed to Australia 65,000 years ago, maybe more. They had to have really good navigational technologies, really good boats, and when they got there, they had to learn very quickly how to exploit entirely new plants and animals. And then look at this migration. These people traveled into northern Siberia during the Ice Age. Now, I don't know if you're impressed by that, but if I were to pick you up and throw you into northern Siberia during the last Ice Age, you'd say, hang on, where's lunch? And I'd say, okay, just look for a mammoth, hunt it down, carve it up and cook it. And you'll say, but I don't have the information, I don't have the knowledge. And I'll say, well, tough, but the locals do. They acquired that knowledge of how to butcher mammoth, how to survive a Siberian winter. So each of these migrations around the world means new knowledge. And by 10,000 years ago, humans are occupying every part of the world apart from Antarctica. So collectively, we humans are controlling a huge amount of resources and energy. And that energy flow, based on collective learning and the accumulation of information, explains the cultural diversity of our species, which is unprecedented. And then, 10,000 years ago, agriculture, the next threshold. So why is agriculture so significant? Let me explain. This is the big history take on agriculture. Let's go back to the sun. There's fusion in the center of the sun, generating a huge amount of energy. It pours into space. Then on Earth, it's captured by plants through photosynthesis. And then what farmers do is they manipulate their environments so as to increase the production of animals and plants they can use, wheat, rice, goats, sheep, cattle, and reduce the production of organisms they can't use. So they get rid of the trees, they get rid of the wolves, they get rid of the snakes. And the end result of this is that more of the energy flowing through the biosphere is controlled by one species, us, humans. This is an energy grab by one species. And with more energy, what happens? Populations grow, villages spread, towns grow, cities appear, empires appear, all the things that historians love to write about as a result of this energy bonanza from agriculture. And then, by about 200 years ago, some economists saying, we're using all of this energy. Growth has to stop. Adam Smith said this. We're farming all the land we can farm on Earth. We're taking all the energy from photosynthesis that we can take. Then what happens is threshold 8. Humans suddenly discover an entirely new source of energy. That's fossil fuels. And to get a sense of the difference, if you depend on agriculture, the food you eat is releasing energy captured from the sun about a year ago. If you burn a piece of wood, you're releasing energy captured 10 years ago, 15 years ago, maximum. If you burn a piece of coal, you're releasing stores of energy that were accumulated over 300 million years by photosynthesis and then buried in the ground. This is a staggering bonanza of energy, and that bonanza is what's created today's world, the extreme complexity of today's world. That's energy under the agrarian regime. Can you imagine today's world without this? And here's one more thing. This is very sudden and very recent. The really big changes happened not in the 18th century, they happened in my lifetime. I was alive then. So all of this increase happened in my lifetime. This is an explosive change on the surface of planet Earth, almost as explosive as that asteroid that wiped out the dinosaurs. So here are the energy flows that allow us to create today's staggering societies in which I could fly by plane from Heathrow to Hong Kong in 11 hours just 4 days ago. So suddenly, as a result of this, we're so powerful that what we do in the next 50 years will shape the future of the entire biosphere and millions of other organisms for millions of years. So get a sense of how significant is this moment in the history of the planet. For the first time in 4 billion years, a single species dominates change in the entire biosphere. And most of the changes have happened in the last 100 years, most of them during my lifetime. Now, if you doubt, if you think I'm exaggerating, let me just give you 3 measures of our growing impact on the biosphere. First, our impact on biospheric systems. We're transforming the oceans, we're transforming the global climate system. You've just had a hurricane here in Hong Kong. My betting, although it's hard to prove, my betting is that that may be just one little indication of changing climate systems. We're changing the circulation of carbon and nitrogen, and this is something I learned yesterday on the internet. We are changing the rotation of planet Earth. Its axis is shifting very slightly, and the reason it's shifting, or one of the reasons, is because of the melting of glaciers in Greenland and the Earth rising. So we are beginning to change how the Earth itself moves. That's our power. So here's the second measure of our power, our destructive power. In 1800, the most powerful human weapons were probably the cannon used at the Battle of Waterloo. Today, there are something like 16,000 or 19,000 nuclear weapons, 1,500 of them on hair trigger alert. If we unleashed them, we could degrade the biosphere in 24 hours. That's the power we have over planet Earth. And finally, recent evidence that in the last 50,000 years, we humans have reduced the mass of life on the biosphere, the biomass, by about 50%. That's mostly by clearing forests. So if you doubt our impact on planet Earth, I hope those figures will give you some idea that this is serious. So I have this nightmare, this sort of recurrent nightmare. I'm asleep and someone wakes me up and they say, "Captain, are you ready to land at LAX airport? And I wake up and I stare at all these dials and these levers, and I haven't a clue what I'm supposed to do. And they say, we're waiting, Captain. Can you land this plane? So I sometimes think that that's the situation we humans are in today. Can we land this huge machine that we have built using fossil fuels? And it's your generation that is going to face this challenge. It's a huge and daunting challenge, but it's also a heroic one. If you can solve this challenge, because I'm not sure that my generation has done a great job, if you can solve this challenge, you will create a better world for my grandchildren and my great-grandchildren, and that will be a wonderful achievement for your generation. So can we control this vast machine? Okay, I'm going to end by talking about where big history is today. Big history tries to tell the origin story of today's world. Why do we need such a story? I hope I've persuaded you of some of the reasons why now. We need to be able to place ourselves in the universe. We need to see what we need to see. We cannot even see the challenge of the near future unless we understand our place in the universe, in the biosphere, and the complex challenges we face today. So where is big history? We've achieved a lot in 30 years. 30 years ago, the very idea of big history was completely off the agenda. We've proved that there is a coherent, rich, and engaging story. I hope I've given you just a feeling for that story. We've proved that the modern origin story can be taught in schools. I think many of you know that, and this has a lot to do with the support of Bill Gates, who allowed us to build the first free online big history course. This can be at the center of modern education, and it can help young people see the challenges they need to see. We've learned that teaching big history can be transformative. It can change the way people think about the world and about the future and their own position in the universe. And we're learning that big history can generate wonderful new research agendas by taking ideas from one discipline, ideas like entropy, and asking if they work in other areas. Does entropy work in history, for example? And finally, there are lots of resources on big history. Academic and popular books, school syllabi, online resources, and my own university, Macquarie, is going to be releasing in November a new online syllabus for high schools, for senior high schools, and for primary schools. And that'll be the first primary school syllabus in big history.